Amen. Amen. Good morning, church. If you don't mind, turn over to the book of Genesis. Book of Genesis. I'll be in chapter number 41. This morning, got a couple verses to read. A real simple thought this morning. Genesis 41. Let me find my verses. Let's begin reading in verse number 46. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. And the food of the field which was round about every city laid he up the same. Verse 49. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much until he left numbering, for it was without number. Now, I'm sure most of us know what happened earlier on in this chapter, and I believe it starts in verse number 17, I believe, when it's Pharaoh was telling the dream that he had to Joseph about the 7 healthy cows and the 7, I guess you say, unhealthy cows, and then the good ears of corn, 7 bad ears of corn. And we know that Joseph interpreted that as saying, well, we're about to have 7 good years, great plentiful years of harvest and everything we do, but then it's going to be followed by 7 bad years. And what do we see here in verse number 48? When we know, we see here that they're gathering up all the food and they're storing it. And they say that they laid up the food in the cities. Hey, they're taking all this extra that they have and they're being responsible with it. They're having a real responsible use, knowing that something bad is going to happen later on. And that's kind of what I want to talk about this morning is, hey, just because you're having a very prosperous time, we still need to be smart with what God is blessing us with. We know that's a lot of corn. We see in verse number 49, corn as the sand of the sea. So it's not just, hey, a little bit extra on top of what you need, but they're saying, hey, it is very plentiful. But once again, they know that there are 7 years of bad harvest, 7 years of dread, 7 years of drought, I guess you'd say, coming right up. And so they're being smart with it. And I wonder, sometimes when I read my Bible, I think of, well, what would happen if so-and-so person wasn't there? What would happen if so-and-so didn't have this say? And I was wondering what Pharaoh maybe would have done if, Joseph didn't interpret that dream. Maybe if he wasn't around and he just thought they were having 7 good years. And if he's like us, a lot of people today, they're going to be a little frivolous with that extra bit. We can see a lot of times people today, maybe, hey, they've had a good work year, maybe they got a raise, maybe they worked a bunch of time, overtime, they got a bunch of extra money than what they thought they were going to get, and then what do a lot of people do? Well, like I said, they're real frivolous with it. They spend it here, spend it there, and I'm the last person to be talking about being smart with money. Do not come to me with any advice, and if I say anything, you should probably do the opposite of what I say. But still, that's one of the biggest things when people make a lot. They think, oh, well, I can go buy this brand new fancy thing instead of being smart with it. Well, we know that there's going to be bad times. We may not know the details, but we need to be smart with what God has blessed us with, because it won't always last. And we can see if we're smart with our money, if we look towards the end of the chapter, end of chapter 41. Let me find it. Where is it? Yeah, let's read verse number 56 and 57. And the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the lands. We see that also it's not just Egypt that's being protected by, hey, Joseph's smart decisions, by him being responsible with what God's given. We see, hey, that other people, other lands are able to go to them and be able to buy from them. And like I say, if we're smart with what God's given us, and I know money is probably the easiest to understand, but there's a lot of other things God can bless us with that, hey, we need to be smart with. That, hey, if we treat it right and take care of it, it'll last longer. But we see that it helped other people. And in our lives, if we're smart with what God's given us, hey, we can be a blessing to other people. That doesn't mean just give everything you got to people just because they ask for it. But that means, hey, maybe help them. Maybe, hey, guide them as to why, hey, you're successful. Showing them, hey, what you need to do with what God's given you. That's kind of everything I got. Don't let prosperity be your downfall. An interesting statistic I wanted to mention a little bit earlier, but I just remembered with the lottery. And none of us in here should be playing the lottery. But I saw that 70% of jackpot winners end up in bankruptcy and broke and going back to earning like a small hourly wage. That's because they get so much and they think they're invincible. That's what I was reading one guy saying is people think they rule the world just because they want a bunch of money. But once again, if you're smart with what God's given you, it'll last. Take care of what He's given you because, hey, we know there are bad times coming up. Amen. Birthdays or wedding anniversaries this past week.